Are the Big Ten and the SEC vying to take over the CFP, and will that ruin or save college football? Coming up next. Hello, football fans. I'm Cliff. You can find me on X at Dog Team Rivalry. That's DAWG Team Rivalry. With me, as always, is...
I am Mac. You can find me on X at B1G Team Rivalry.
And welcome to the Point a Minute show on Michigan football at the Voice of College Football, where we have one outstanding point for every minute of video. Mac, let's get into it. We wanted to talk about the 12-team playoff. Now, the 12-team playoff changed the college football landscape. Previously, if you lost one game in the regular season, you started to worry. If you lost two, the season's over. Now, with the 12-team playoffs, a team with two losses that finished fourth in the Big Ten just won the national championship. That's fine. Congratulations, Ohio State. Whatever. But what we're seeing is the Big Ten and the SEC essentially buying up franchises to improve their chances of getting in the playoffs. Why? Because money. At the same time, this has thrown the playoff structure into chaos. In the first year, the top four teams lost in the first round, calling into question the seeding structure for the playoffs. Why is Boise State getting a first-round bye while ranked lower than Texas? It doesn't matter because now they want to change it again, pushing for an NFL-adjacent system with college football teams instead of just going full-on minor leagues. Mac, to start things off, what is even going on?
Mr. McGillicuddy that's the guy who's like known for being greedy, right?
He was the owner of the company that Lucille Ball worked for in the second show that she did after I Love Lucy ended.
All right, I didn't know any of that, so that joke didn't work at all.
Are you thinking of Pennybags from
Pennybags?
Monopoly?
Yeah, Mr. Pennybag strikes again. I heard somebody mention McGillicuddy in terms of like rich people who ruin everything, so that joke didn't land. All right. So here's what's going on. The SEC and the Big Ten are attempting to exert more control over the college football playoff by potentially expanding it to either 14 or, God forbid, 16 teams starting in 2026. Now, with this new structure, both the SEC and the Big Ten would be guaranteed 4 automatic bids each, with the ACC and the Big 12 each getting 2, and then the highest ranked group of 5 team getting the last one. Obviously, this is being driven by the SEC and the Big Ten, by the SEC and the Big Ten's attempts at increasing their revenue share from the college football playoff. Don't panic, because this isn't actually done yet. Okay, now start panicking, because it's basically guaranteed that it will happen. So starting in 2026, this is what happened with ESPN. Starting in 2026, the SEC and the Big Ten will have sole discretion over the future of the playoff format due to the 6-year TV deal made with ESPN. In that deal, it was determined that the Big Ten and the SEC could consult with other conferences, but did not need consent from those conferences in order to change the playoff format from 14 or 16 teams, in order to change the playoff format to 14 or 16 teams, including the 4 auto bids for both the Big Ten and the SEC. Now, there are a couple of questions that arise from this. First, does that mean that the SEC is going to a 9-game conference season? Not sure yet. Right now, they're at 8 because they don't want to risk their own teams losing and cannibalizing each other for, in losing out on CFP appearances. I get it. That immediately makes them more, wusses compared to the Big Ten. But okay. The fact that they are guaranteeing bids could alleviate this fear, though. So the idea now, or the rumor is right now, is that the SEC is more open to it than they've ever been towards going to the 9-game conference season rather than sticking with just the 8-game conference season. But there is also a rumor that they would be looking at scheduling specific scheduling, like special games with the Big Ten. So it'd be like the Big Ten SEC challenge type of thing earlier in the season as part of the non-conference. Another question is, what's going to happen to conference championship games? So Ross Dellinger points out in his Yahoo Sports article that what could happen is the Big Ten and the SEC would play a play-in weekend featuring their 3rd through 6th place teams who are playing a game to determine who secures the last 2 guaranteed bids. Okay, so obviously the other conferences don't really get an opportunity to do that because there are only 2 bids going to the Big 12 and the ACC respectively. So it kind of feels like a rich get richer sort of scenario, but that's basically what's going on.
So is it essentially just another step towards the Super League we were talking about last summer?
Yeah, basically. I mean, they're kind of like slowly bleeding the other conferences of their TV revenue. This is how it seems anyways, that they're slowly bleeding the conferences of their TV revenue so that eventually the ACC and the Big 12 will just, I mean, they'll have to give up. The teams will just, they need money. They need to cover their operating costs, obviously. So at that point, they'll almost have to join the Big 10 or the SEC or just create their own league. Which kind of brings up the idea of relegation that I had and a lot of other people had. Maybe the ACC and the Big 12 and whatever's left of the Pac-12 and Mountain West need to join forces, the MACtion as well, the MAC conference, and create their own league, and then relegation could happen. That would be kind of a neat thing. Like maybe you finish in the bottom half of the Big 10 and you're forced to join the ACC for a year. It's kind of funny, actually. That would be hilarious.
Forced to join the ACC.
Forced to join the ACC. God forbid. But anyway, yeah. So conference champions would probably be crowned at the end of the regular season, having secured their first place seeding and their bid to the playoffs. Second place team, they'd obviously secure their auto bid, and then the next 4 teams would essentially play for the next 2 spots.
So with all of this happening, I think the obvious next question has to be, is college football being ruined by greed?
It's a difficult question to answer. So it's been said, I've mentioned this before, but it has been said that if you want an animal on the endangered species list to not be on the endangered species list, you got to let people eat it.
Ted Nugent.
Ted Nugent said that?
Detroit's own, yeah.
Oh, how about that? All right. I think kind of a similar thing might be happening with college football. If you want it to continue, people need to have an incentive to keep it going. And that incentive happens to be the several billions of dollars that it generates in revenue every year. The downside is that it's a sport that was known for its regional rivalries, and this makes it that much more of a national sport. So it's losing kind of its local feel and turning more into a national product like the NFL. The upside is that with all of the money being made, there are a ton of really powerful people who are going to work very hard at ensuring it remains something worthwhile to be a part of. Now I'm going to immediately contradict that with an example even. So Star Wars used to make Disney a lot of money, and then they turned it into an insulting pile of steaming hot garbage, and Bob Iger should be sent to Gitmo for his part in it. So just because it makes money doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stay a good product. So corporate execs, they kind of have a funny way of making horrible decisions for short-term profit, and that affects the long-term health of the game or the long-term health of the franchise, as it were. So I'm going to be kind of optimistic here and say the jury's still out. The on-field product, in my opinion, is still a ton of fun. And I think as long as they don't continue to mess with that, then we're good. They had a couple of rule changes. The clock runs under 2 minutes. If they don't mess with anything else, I think the on-field product is still worth watching. But I'll reiterate what I've said on this show and ours for a while now, that multiple loss teams should not be allowed to play for a championship because it cheapens the regular season. And that's exactly what the 12-team playoff did. A 14 or 16-team playoff would make it that much worse. And I think that the guaranteed bids would make it even worse than that. Until finally you have something, absolutely crazy, like totally bonkers, like a team finishing 4th place in their conference and still being allowed to play for a national championship.
How does that happen?
How does that happen? And frankly, last word on this, I'm glad that they won the Natty. It's a great story, and they did what was asked of them, and that's awesome. It cheapens the regular season. Losing to Michigan should have kept Ohio State out of the playoffs, but now you can lose to whoever you want to during the regular season, and as long as you make the top 6 in your conference, Big 10 and SEC anyway, as long as you make it into the top 6, you still have a chance to play for a Natty, because then you can play that play-in game to get one of those guaranteed spots. And that's just ridiculous.
Well, and I think that's what we have to come to grips with. You say it cheapens the regular season. It cheapens the regular season when you're looking at it from the regional perspective. So that's what guys like me have to get used to with college football. Like you said, college football no longer being a regional sport. Now it's a national sport. Well, if it's a national sport, it needs to be more like the NFL. And in the NFL, you can do that. What just happened this past year isn't unusual in the NFL. It's just unusual for college football because we're so used to, one loss means you're worried, 2 losses means your season's over.
And I think, to put it bluntly, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Iowa and Illinois at the end of the 2024 regular season would have still had an opportunity to play for a national title, both of which had 3 losses in conference. Iowa had 5 losses total. So Iowa could have played in one of the play-in games. And what if they had won? Then they'd be in the playoffs with 5 losses? 5 losses is embarrassing. And I understand that Michigan had 5 losses, and a lot of Ohio State fans want to say, like, oh, Michigan fans are totally fine with Michigan having 5 losses. No, we're not. We just think it's hilarious that we have 5 losses and you weren't one of them. That's just kind of amazing. But in no world would I say, oh, Michigan definitely should have been allowed to play for a national title. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they should have been in the playoffs because they beat Ohio State and Alabama in back-to-back games. I understand there was a period of time in between those games, but maybe they should have been. By this logic, yeah, let's let them in. I mean, Minnesota finished 8th in the conference, but they've got 5 losses. So what's the difference between them and Iowa? Let's just expand the playoffs to let everybody in. Let's let Purdue at 1-11. Let's let them in. See what happens. I'm just extending the length of the video at this point. I'm done.
With that, we'd like to hear from you. Well, some of you anyway. Drop a comment and answer the questions. Is college football being ruined by money? Was it better before the national championship when it was regional? Or is more football always better football? Let us know in the comments. Mac, take us out.
This is the Point a Minute Show on Michigan football at the Voice of College Football.